The radio crackled at 2:47 a.m. with coordinates that weren't supposed to exist. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had walked this perimeter for 3 years, but tonight something was different. What she discovered in those coordinates would save thousands of lives, if anyone would believe a female security guard working the night shift. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story of vigilance and courage resonates with you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of the heroes who stand watch while others sleep, never asking for recognition they deserve. Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana was not the kind of place that attracted attention. Situated on the windswept plains 2,000 miles from nowhere, it housed one of America's 3 nuclear missile wings, 150 Minutemen III intercontinental ballistic missiles spread across 13,800 square miles of prairie. The base itself was unremarkable. Low concrete buildings, chain-link fencing, and endless stretches of tarmac that disappeared into the darkness beyond the floodlights. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez preferred it that way. At 29, she had found her calling in the quiet responsibility of base security. While others sought glory in combat deployments or high-profile assignments, Maria understood that some of the most important battles were fought in silence, in the spaces between dramatic moments, by people who never expected their names to appear in headlines. She had been walking the night shift at Malmstrom for 3 years, ever since requesting transfer from a communications unit at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The move had puzzled her colleagues. Why would anyone volunteer for security duty at a missile base in the middle of nowhere? But Maria had her reasons. Her father, a retired Air Force Master Sergeant, had taught her that the most vital work often happened when no one was watching. The perimeter check began at 2. Maria would start at the main gate, work her way around the outer fence line, check each security checkpoint, and complete a full circuit that took exactly 4 hours if done properly. Most guards rushed through it, eager to return to the climate-controlled security office where they could watch monitors and drink coffee. Maria took her time. She listened to the night, watched for patterns, noticed details that others missed. Tonight felt different from the moment she stepped outside. The Montana wind carried something unusual. Not the typical scent of prairie grass and diesel fuel, but something metallic, acrid. She couldn't place it, but 3 years of walking these same paths had taught her to trust her instinct. At 2:30 a.m., she reached checkpoint 7, the easternmost point of the perimeter. The area was designated as farmland buffer zone, empty fields that stretched for miles between the base and the nearest civilian structure. According to regulations, nothing should be out there except wheat stubble and fence posts. But as Maria swept her flashlight across the field, she caught a glint of metal about 200 yards beyond the fence. She stopped, focusing her beam on the spot. There, partially hidden behind a small rise in the terrain, was what appeared to be a vehicle. She keyed her radio. "Security control, this is Rodriguez at checkpoint 7. I have a possible vehicle contact in the eastern buffer zone." The response came back immediately. "Rodriguez, that's private farmland. Probably just farm equipment." "Roger. Control. But the positioning seems unusual. Vehicle appears to be positioned with line of sight to the base." A pause, then. "Rodriguez, complete your patrol and return to base. We'll check it out in the morning." Maria stared at the distant vehicle. Something was wrong. Farm equipment didn't park with tactical positioning. Farmers didn't work their fields at 2:30 in the morning. And that metallic smell in the air was getting stronger. She continued her patrol but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At checkpoint 9, she found fresh tire tracks in the soft earth near the fence. Tracks that hadn't been there during her patrol the previous night. Multiple vehicles by the look of it, and they'd been there recently. At 2:47 a.m., as she approached checkpoint 12, her radio erupted with an encrypted transmission on a frequency that wasn't supposed to exist. "Phoenix team, coordinates 4750 on Nest 1 through Nest 5 in position." Maria froze. Those coordinates put the transmission somewhere on base property, and package delivery combined with nest positions sounded distinctly like military terminology for an operation. She immediately keyed her radio to report the transmission, but something made her hesitate. The voice on the encrypted channel had spoken with an American accent, using proper military phonetics. This wasn't foreign interference. This was someone with training, someone who knew proper communications protocols. Instead of reporting immediately, Maria decided to investigate. She pulled out her personal GPS unit and entered the coordinates from the transmission. The location was approximately half a mile northeast of her current position, in a maintenance area that housed backup generators and utility infrastructure. Moving carefully and keeping her radio on low volume, Maria made her way toward the coordinates. As she got closer, she could see lights, not the steady illumination of base facilities, but the focused beams of tactical flashlights moving in coordinated pattern. She found a position behind a maintenance shed about 100 yards from the activity, and observed through her binoculars. What she saw made her blood run cold. 5 individuals dressed in dark clothing were moving around the base's backup power infrastructure. They worked with military precision, one person standing watch, while others attached what appeared to be electronic devices to the power grid. Even from a distance, she could see that these weren't maintenance personnel. Their movements were too tactical, too coordinated. Most alarming was what they were installing. The devices were small, sophisticated, and being placed at critical points in the power grid. Maria had enough technical training to recognize the components of a coordinated electrical disruption system. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice low. "Security control, this is Rodriguez. I have 5 unknown individuals tampering with base infrastructure at grid reference." She gave the coordinates. "Rodriguez, say again, you're breaking up." She tried again, but the radio only produced static. Looking down at her unit, she saw the signal strength indicator showing 0 bars. Someone was jamming communications in this area. Maria faced a critical decision. She could retreat, try to get outside the jamming radius, and call for backup. But by the time she reached help and returned, these individuals would likely be gone, and whatever they were installing would be in place. Or she could approach alone and try to gather more intelligence, despite being outnumbered 5 to 1. She chose a third option. Moving carefully to get a better view, she used her personal cell phone to record video of the activity. The quality was poor in the darkness, but it clearly showed multiple individuals working on base infrastructure. She sent the video to her personal email account as backup, then composed a detailed message describing what she was witnessing. As she worked, she overheard fragments of conversation from the intruders. "Nest 2 in position. When the power grid goes down, we'll have a 12-minute window. Security response will be delayed. Primary target is the command bunker during shift change." Maria's heart pounded as the implications became clear. This wasn't just sabotage. This was a coordinated attack timed for a 0600 hours, when the base would be at its most vulnerable during shift change. The power grid disruption was just the opening move. She needed to get this information to base security immediately. But the radio jamming meant normal channels were blocked. She began moving back toward the main base, staying in cover, when her path was suddenly blocked by a 6th figure. "Well, what do we have here?" The man was dressed in tactical gear, and carried himself with military bearing. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, isn't it?" Maria's hand moved toward her sidearm, but the man raised a finger in warning. "I wouldn't recommend that. We've been watching you for quite some time. You have a reputation for being thorough in your duties." "Who are you?" Maria demanded, keeping her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Let's just say we're people who understand the importance of national security. The question is, do you? I understand that you're conducting unauthorized activities on a United States Air Force installation. That makes you terrorists." The man smiled coldly. "Terrorists? No, Sergeant. We're patriots. What's happening here tonight is necessary to prevent a much larger catastrophe." "What are you talking about?" "This base houses nuclear weapons that are controlled by a command structure that's been compromised. We have intelligence that foreign agents have infiltrated the command hierarchy. What we're doing tonight will temporarily disable their ability to launch an unauthorized strike." Maria studied the man's face, looking for signs of deception. His story was sophisticated, designed to appeal to her sense of duty. But something was wrong with his narrative. If that were true, you'd be working with base security, not around them. "Unfortunately, we don't know how deep the infiltration goes. We can't trust official channels." "Then prove it. Show me your credentials." The man's expression hardened. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Sarge. What I can offer you is a choice. You can continue your patrol, file a routine report, and forget what you've seen here. Or you can interfere with a classified operation and face the consequences." Maria's mind raced through her options. The man's story was plausible but unverifiable. However, his presence here with no official authorization was a clear violation of base security protocols. "I need to verify this through proper channels," she said finally. "I'm afraid that's not an option." Before Maria could react, 2 more figures emerged from the shadows behind her. She was surrounded, outnumbered, and cut off from communication with base security. But Maria Rodriguez hadn't survived 3 years of night patrols by being unprepared. As the men moved to restrain her, she triggered a small personal alarm device clipped to her belt, a silent signal that would alert base security if she didn't check in within 30 minutes. Smart, the leader said, noticing her action. But 30 minutes is more than enough time for us to complete our operation. They zip-tied her hands and moved her to a position where she could see the full scope of their activity. What she observed over the next 20 minutes was clearly a coordinated attack, not a counterintelligence operation. The team had placed devices throughout the power grid that would create a cascading failure at exactly. They had positioned explosive charges at key communication towers. Most damning, they had installed equipment that would jam all radio frequencies except one, a frequency they controlled. As 0600 approached, Maria could see the devastating plan taking shape. The power failure would disable base security systems. The communication jamming would prevent coordination of response. And during the chaos, a larger team would move on the command bunker when it was most vulnerable during shift change. At 0618, her personal alarm would trigger base security to search for her. But by then the attack would be complete. Maria tested her restraints. The zip ties were tight but not professionally applied. Working carefully, she managed to position them against a sharp edge on the metal structure where they'd left her. It took 15 minutes of careful work, but she freed herself just as the team began their final preparation. Moving silently, she made her way to the communication tower they hadn't yet targeted. If she could reach the emergency broadcast system, she could alert the entire base regardless of their jamming. At 0557, as the attack team counted down to their coordinated strike, Maria's voice echoed across every speaker on Malmstrom Air Force Base. All personnel, this is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, with emergency security alert. Coordinated attack in progress. Multiple hostile personnel on base property. Power grid compromise imminent. All units implement lockdown procedures immediately. The response was instantaneous. Emergency sirens wailed across the base. Security teams mobilized. The shift change was suspended, keeping the command bunker at full security status. The attack team's leader spoke into his radio. Package delivery compromised. Execute emergency extraction. But it was too late. Base security, now alerted and coordinated, moved to seal all exits. Air Force security forces, trained for exactly this type of threat, responded with overwhelming force. The confrontation was brief but decisive. 4 of the attackers were captured attempting to flee through the perimeter fence. 2 others, including the leader, were apprehended near their vehicles in the farmland beyond the base. In the aftermath, investigators discovered that the attack had been planned for months. The team had infiltrated the area gradually, posing as farm workers and maintenance contractors. Their goal had been to disable the base's nuclear command and control systems during a window of vulnerability, potentially compromising national security on a scale that would have made international headlines. The devices they'd planted were sophisticated enough to cause weeks of disruption to base operations. The timing of their attack, during shift change when security protocols were briefly relaxed, showed intimate knowledge of base procedure. Most disturbing was the discovery that the attack team had detailed intelligence about base security patterns, including patrol routes and timing. They had specifically planned around the assumption that night shift security would be routine and inattentive. They hadn't counted on Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. In the investigation that followed, Maria's actions were analyzed in detail. Her decision to investigate the unusual transmission rather than dismiss it. Her recognition that the radio jamming indicated a serious threat. Her ability to gather intelligence while outnumbered and outgunned. Her quick thinking in triggering the personal alarm. And finally, her determination to reach the emergency broadcast system despite the personal risk. Each decision had been critical to preventing what intelligence analysts later described as potentially the most serious breach of nuclear security in U.S. history. The commendation ceremony took place 6 weeks later in the base theater. Maria stood at attention as the base commander read the citation for her Air Force Commendation Medal with Valor device, for exceptionally meritorious service and heroic actions, while serving as Security Forces member at Malmstrom Air Force Base. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's vigilance, courage and decisive action prevented a coordinated attack on critical national security infrastructure. Her actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon herself, her unit and the United States Air Force. But the ceremony wasn't the end of Maria's story. Word of her actions had reached higher levels of command, and she received an offer that would change her career trajectory. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, said the colonel who approached her after the ceremony, I'm Colonel Sarah Chen from Air Force Special Investigations. We have a proposition for you. Yes, ma'am. We need people with your instincts and attention to detail. People who can see patterns others. Would you be interested in investigating threats that most people never see coming? Maria considered the offer. She could continue walking perimeter patrols, maintaining the quiet vigilance that had served her well. Or she could take her skills to a larger stage, protecting against threats that operated in the shadows. What kind of threats, ma'am? The kind that count on people not paying attention. The kind that assumes security is just routine. The kind you stopped here. 6 months later, Agent Maria Rodriguez completed her training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Her first assignment involved investigating security breaches at military installations across the country. Threats that emerged from the patterns only trained eyes could detect. Her success at Malmstrom had revealed something important. The most sophisticated attacks often succeeded not through overwhelming force, but by exploiting assumptions about routine security operations. The attackers had counted on their activities being dismissed as normal, their presence unremarked, their timing unchallenged. They had underestimated the power of one person who refused to accept that unusual meant normal. Maria's career in federal law enforcement would span 15 years and prevent dozens of security breaches. But she never forgot the lesson learned during that night shift in Montana. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by people willing to investigate when something doesn't feel right, even when everyone else thinks they're being paranoid. The memorial plaque installed at Malmstrom's main gate reads simply, "Vigilance is the price of security." But those who knew the full story understood it differently. Sometimes vigilance is one person walking a perimeter in the middle of the night, paying attention when others assume everything is routine. And sometimes that's enough to save the world. If you stayed until the end, tell us in the comments. Have you ever noticed something that others dismissed only to discover it was actually important? And if this story moved you, share it with someone who understands that the most vital work often happens when no one is watching. Performed by heroes who never expect recognition for doing their job exactly right when it matters most.